your new baseline, once you actually start using drugs on a regular basis, you're not ever sitting at your 100 again. In fact, every day you wake up and your dopamine is sitting at 35 or 40. It is hard to get out of bed. It is hard to pour cereal for your kids. It's hard to get showered and go to work. It's hard to be a nice, pleasant person to anybody around you. And in order to feel normal, you continue to drink or use drugs just to get yourself back to baseline. I'm not talking about chasing yourself out of the sickness of withdrawal. People are desperate to feel normal again, and they continue to use. And for those of us who work with a lot of people who struggle with addiction, they'll say, I haven't gotten high in forever. I am just trying to function on a day-to-day basis. So the prolonged use, and prolonged here could be 6 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 months, the prolonged use of any drug, which is actually most addictive drugs, that affect the dopamine system, is it suppresses the dopamine in the brain, so you no longer live at a baseline that allows you to function. So again, this just sort of demonstrates that evolutionarily speaking, when you get a spike, you return to normal when it comes to food or sex or falling in love or hanging out with your pet or having a great athletic performance. Those are things that spike your dopamine and bring your dopamine back to normal. Drugs, you don't go back to normal over time. I'm going to skip some slides just to be rapid here. But so these are PET scans that look at brains. Anything that's orange is dopamine. That's a nice, healthy brain that's on the left. People struggling with drugs is going to be on the right, not a lot of orange. And I'm happy to give these to Dot, and anybody who wants these slides and take them, Dot, would you pass around maybe a sign-up sheet? Because you have these slides. I don't care who takes these slides. I don't care, thank you for moving that box. I don't care who uses them. You can use them in class. You can use them and give this talk to somebody else. You can show them to your kids. There's a couple YouTube videos of this. So spread these slides around because I know my visuals aren't perfect here. When you go drug by drug, that right column, as you can see, has very little bright orange in it. That middle column is where there's dopamine, because those are normal brains. But that top drug is cocaine. The next one down is crystal meth. The third one down is alcohol. The final one is heroin. And the point I want to make on this is alcohol keeps dopamine levels not normal, but fairly functional, which is why so many of us are functional alcoholics for so long. The wheels fall off the bus of alcohol misuse pretty late in the game. Alcoholism and alcohol misuse surrounds all of us. And when I look at my own county jail, 80% of the people there are there for alcohol or drug-related offenses, and that's got to be true at our local jail here too. That's true everywhere. 80%. And half of them are there for alcohol-related. We all think everybody's there for heroin, but really the drug that gets many of us in trouble is alcohol. And for us to not acknowledge that is a problem. And I want you to think about that as we start thinking about marijuana. So I'm going to skip here for a second. I am going to just acknowledge that I simplify the story of how addiction happens. Addiction is a complicated thing. For those people who are scientists or are medical or love learning this stuff, there's a great New England Journal article that came out in January 2015 that goes through the physiology of addiction. And again, for anybody who wants the slides, it's cited there. I am going to just spend a minute because I think this is critical. Your local hospital is where? It's Winchester Hospital. So I'm not going to say anything bad about Winchester Hospital because I actually know Winchester Hospital and it's a really good hospital, but I'm going to say something that's very general that I think is the truth, which is that in an emergency room setting, that man up there who's 68 years old, his wife calls 911 because he's having crushing substernal chest pain. And an ambulance is set out. They have an EKG lead that's getting transmitted to the ER instantly. He has sublingual nitroglycerin, he has an aspirin, he's given a beta blocker, they have an IV in him, and they're giving him some morphine instantly. By the time he arrives in Winchester, they know that he's having a massive heart attack and he's getting med-flighted right to the Brigham for a quadruple bypass. That is happening. It is happening today. He gets admitted to the Brigham, he has quadruple bypass, he's brought to the cardiac care unit, he's brought to the floor, he has a social work consult because he's going to get depressed. He has a follow-up appointment with me, his primary care doctor, and his cardiologist. He goes to cardiac rehab. He has a new therapist who started on the antidepressant. How much money just got spent on him? A lot. Yeah, maybe not $1 million, but at the Brigham, maybe. I don't know. I can't say that. Maybe $250,000 just got spent on him. Okay. Right next door to him is a 24-year-old woman who struggles with an opiate use disorder. Her mom has Narcan because she knows when her daughter's struggling. She finds her blue and unresponsive in the bathroom, gives her Narcan. She actually doesn't respond. Mom was smart, called 911 first. The police or 911 show up first. They have Narcan on them. It takes her 4 tries of Narcan to get her revived. Finally, she's revived in the emergency room. What happens to her at Winchester Hospital's emergency room? She gets discharged. Maybe she gets a brochure. Hi, I know you have vomiting and diarrhea because I just yanked you out of acute withdrawal and overdose, but here's some numbers. Good luck to you. Start calling. You should call every minute of every day for the next 48 hours to find a bed. Let's go back to him. He's a pack-a-day smoker. He drinks a 6-pack every day. He hasn't shown up in my primary care office in 2 years, even though he has blood pressure problems and sugar problems. He doesn't actually take any of his medicines. Both of his parents died early of a heart attack, right? Every one of his diseases was caused by him, every one of them, right? He shouldn't be in a heart attack, in the operating room with bypass. He created all those problems, but did anybody wag their finger at him when he rolled in and said, you know what, you are really, honestly, 100% responsible for this presentation? Nobody did that. We don't shame and blame people for their medical problems. A lot of their medical problems are caused because we don't make good choices. Most of us don't exercise enough. Most of us don't eat well enough. A lot of us use substances that get us in trouble. And instead, as a medical field, we provide the best care we can to people at the time. Unless, by the way, they have an addiction. In which case, we make them feel terrible and we offer them very few choices. So we have got to shift the way we think about who it is and how it is we provide care to people. If you're going to shame and blame people, do it equally. But don't do that, actually. Actually, meet people where they are and get them the care they need. Okay, so this is who is likely to struggle with an addiction. There's 3 factors that are predictors. One is genetics. One is early exposure or early use. The third one is a history of trauma. And all of those things feed into poor mental health. Both directions. Sometimes poor mental health, people who might experiment with early use of marijuana, they do it because they have baseline anxiety, and when they smoke marijuana or otherwise ingest marijuana, they'll say to you, my anxiety feels better, my sleep is better. So let's talk about the genetics of addiction. Genetics accounts for 50% of all addiction. If you have a parent or a grandparent with addiction, you have almost a 50% likelihood of struggling with addiction yourself. So who needs to know that? Your kids need to know that. It is the right thing to tell your kids the same way you would say, we have a really strong history of cardiac disease or a lot of cancer. Get louder? Is that what it is? Or are you asking a question? Or are you just waiting? Okay. So who needs to know that? Your kids need to know that because you would tell them everything else about you, and this is they don't get to control their genetics, right? They get what they get. They get to control the next thing we're going to talk about, which is their age and first exposure. And that can almost cancel out the genetics. So they need to know your genetic risk, even if you're in recovery. Because just because you're in recovery, the genetics didn't disappear. So I've sat down with my kids. I've gone through our family tree. I've been very clear with them where they're at risk. And my family, their kids have risk, period. And I've said very clear to them, because of the risk that they have been handed down to them, they need to do their first drug of abuse when and if they do it as late as possible. So let's talk about that all of addiction is a pediatric developmental disease. If you do not expose the developing brain to an addictive substance while the brain is developing, i.e. under the age of 24, you will not develop an addiction. Whether it's to alcohol or nicotine or marijuana or any of those things. And I know that sounds crazy. It sounds like I'm making a really strong statement. But when you talk to anybody who has an addiction, you say to them, what was your first drug of abuse and how old were you? Was it marijuana, was it nicotine, or was it alcohol? And everybody will say it was mostly one of those 3 things. And a starting act. And they'll name an age. And sometimes that age is 12, 13, 15. Every now and then I get somebody who says 17. That's actually a late number, quite honestly. When I work at the jail and I ask that question to my inmates at the jail, the average age of first use is 8 or 9. And that seems extraordinary, right? Extraordinary. It's sickening, right? But just think about it for yourself. First of all, these days, parents aren't leaving packs of cigarettes lying around because our smoking rate in this country has, thank God, gone way down. But for our generation, parents and grandparents had packs of cigarettes lying around. It was nothing to steal cigarettes from your parents, right? And then think about where your alcohol is kept in your own house. Is it under lock and key? Okay, I love some nodding heads back there. I don't often get any nods because most of our alcohol is left in a cabinet where any teenager, a 12, 13, and 8-year-old, could pour themselves out some and then refill it with water. Because I know what it was like in the 1980s. I know what we did, right? We're not stupid. So my alcohol at home, since I've had teenagers, has been under lock and key. And I remember my kids saying to me, do you not trust us? And I said, Actually, I love you guys, but you're teenagers. Not that I don't trust you, I know what the teenage brain does. And I don't know who's coming into my house 24 hours a day, because I work, right? I'm not home all the time. So in order to keep you guys safe, why should I leave it in an open cabinet? When you look at a 15-year-old who starts drinking, and drinking here is defined as 2 drinks a week. I'm not talking about a half keg or a Friday night. 2 drinks a week. 15-year-olds who do that, 40% of them go on to be alcoholics. If you wait your first time you start drinking to the age of 21, then defined again as 2 drinks a week, 7% go on to alcoholism. Right? That is a huge chasm between those two things. Preventing our 15-year-olds from having regular access and drinking alcohol is critical. Having them wait until they're 20, 21, 24 is an incredibly protective thing. And if they can do their first exposure sometime after 21 or 22, they come very close to canceling out the genetics. That's the one thing our kids get to control. So that's why you need to explain your genetic risk in your own field. And then the final thing, I'm not going to spend as much time on this because I want to hear from some of the other speakers, but a history of childhood trauma. And I'm not going to go through the entire ACE study or the ACE score, but for when you look at the slides later, I want you to dive in on that stuff. A history of trauma under the age of 18 has a huge influence on who might struggle with addiction. If you've had a lot of sadness, loss, grief, sexual abuse, physical abuse, feeling like you weren't loved in your own household, one way that a lot of us survive that is we numb up. And there's nothing that will numb you up more than alcohol or drugs. So when I am taking care of someone with a history of trauma, I'm very conscious of what it is they might turn to. So let's talk about cigarettes. Lowest use ever in the history of the United States prior to 1900, which is great. But as cigarettes have gone down, marijuana has gone up. And that is because the sense of harm with marijuana has gone down. So nobody in the room is allowed to answer this unless you're under the age of 25. Under 25, okay? So, my under 25s, what do you guys know about marijuana? What's your thought of it? Or, I'll open it up more widely. What does the average teenager tell you about marijuana? It's harmless, it's okay, it's fine, yep. It's not addictive. You won't get addicted by it, yep.
It's like not a drug.
It's not a drug, it's legal. It's legal everywhere, right? What else? It's organic, it's a plant, you can put it in a seed in the backyard, totally natural. What else? Yeah.
It's not as bad as a lot of other drugs out there.
It's not as bad as what?
A lot of other substances out there.
Yeah, specifically it's not as bad as alcohol. I hear that one all the time. It's not nearly as bad as alcohol. It's way better than a lot of other drugs, yeah?
Medicine.
It's medicine. It cures things. It'll fix your seizures. It'll cure cancer. Like, you guys are doing a great job of shouting out what it is the average person under the age of 20-something will tell you. The response back on marijuana. I think you basically, oh, no one's ever died of marijuana. I hear that one too. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about brain development. So we used to think the brain was done developing at the age of 12, and now we really are very clear that's not true. So the brain goes through significant changes between ages of 12 and 24. There's 3 things that happen specifically. One is synaptic refinement. The brain has billions of synapses firing all the time, and nobody needs tens of billions. It's actually too many. And when we look at brains of people who have major psychiatric illness, they actually have too many synapses firing. So pruning back the brain, cutting back some of these synapses happens during the ages of 12 and 24. And there are times during the teenage years where you are clipping back 13,000 synapses a minute. And you can imagine those 2 weeks every other year that that's happening, exposing yourself to substances, and all of a sudden you're clipping back the wrong thing. Sometimes I look at my 14-year-old who's acting like a lunatic, and I think in my rational brain, I think she's clipping back synapses right now. That's one way to talk yourself off the ledge. And I'm going to shut my mouth and not say anything, just let that process happen, and hope she's doing a lot of healthy things during that couple weeks when a lot of things are getting pruned back. So you're trying to track pathways that are going to be helpful and helpful later on. So the other thing is myelination or ensheathing or insulating really good pathways in your brain. That's the second thing that our teenagers are doing. And it's why our teenage brains are so awesome and a little bit crazy and love to experience a lot of physicality, a lot of risk-taking, a lot of sensation-seeking. They're incredibly influenced by peers because they're supposed to be. Their brains are perfect and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing because this stuff has to happen. But what we try to encourage as parents and as teachers and as nurses is to have as many healthy exposures during these critical forming years and as few unhealthy ones. Because you can imagine all of these things going awry. And then the final thing that happens is the laying down of two major neurotransmitter receptors, dopamine, which we talked about already, and the other one is a neurotransmitter called anandamide. Anandamide is the mirror image of THC. THC is the active ingredient in marijuana. And throughout the cortex, or the final layer of the brain, is where the anandamide lies. So it's the final shell of the brain, that last part of the brain that cooks, that is loaded with these little tiny receptors whose job it is to decide what gets cut back and what gets myelinated. And the problem is that THC comes in and boots our natural one out of the way. It's like a sledgehammer, and begins to create actually really unhealthy pathways. So there's no one in this room who's going to convince me that higher and higher exposure to THC while the brain is developing is a positive thing to the developing brain. We are learning more and more about what THC does to the brain. One of our problems is that we do not study marijuana well in this country. And why is that? So somebody said it doesn't make any money not studying. So the problem is that to study as a Schedule I drug, you have to use federally grown marijuana that's grown at the University of Mississippi, which, by the way, has been grown there since the 70s. And whatever's being grown in Mississippi is not what they're using in Franklin County, Massachusetts. So, first of all, studying it is sort of inaccurate. And also, it's a pain in the neck. It's very hard to get federal funding to study marijuana. And so we do not do good studies. Most of the studies come out of Australia and New Zealand and some of the European countries. And so some of the studies that I'm going to talk about, a very famous one is called the Dunedin study. And what it does is it follows students who started marijuana at the ages of 13, 15, 17, and it follows them for 25 years. It asks the question, what is their life like? How are they doing? Are they thriving on this planet? And it showed two important things. One is, in general, there's a very strong sense of dissatisfaction with where they got in life. Like, people who used marijuana at 13 and 15 got to be 38 and said, yeah, I didn't get to be what I wanted to be. I'm disappointed. And on average, there was an 8-point drop in IQ. So again, a well-done study, but it's not tons of studies that are looking at marijuana. The problem with the Dunedin study, it also shows a far lower high school completion rate and a far lower matriculation to college. The problem with the Dunedin study is it looked at the old marijuana, because that's what they had back then, right? It was following kids from the 80s and 90s, and back in the 80s and 90s, the average THC in anything that was grown out there was between 1% and 2.5%. There's no field-grown plant that the DEA is testing for right now that is sitting lower than 9 to 16% THC, and that's what's grown in the field, right? So here I have a plant that's running 8 times, 10 times, 15 times higher in terms of the psychoactive ingredient than what was studied in this study. So here I have a study that shows an 8-point drop in IQ on really low THC. I can guarantee you that IQs are not increasing the higher THC you get. And I know that the police chief and other people are going to talk a little bit more about this. When I show pictures like this to your average, I don't know, my average Wellesley women, they have no idea what these products are, right? Because most of us who have ever used marijuana in our lives can recognize a plant and some dried material and maybe a fat rolled joint. That is not what today's marijuana looks like. It looks like this. So earwax, some of it, butters, shatter, hash oil, some of the cannabinoid oils are running 100% THC. Every product up here is sitting between 40% and 100% THC. That's a very strong product. And that is what is available to our kids now. So again, we're going to talk about all the ways that one can consume a little bit later as other people speak. But it comes no longer as just something that one is smoking. Most people are vaporizing it, or they're using it in a food item or beverage item, and using it in edibles. And it's going to be talked about a little bit more, but these are actually in Doc Butler got these out of Colorado. These are products from Colorado that one could purchase. And what I want to point out about these products, first of all, these are things in Colorado too. They're candy, they're gummy bears, there's Kit Kats, they're Nestle Crunch. not called Nestle Crunch. This very lovely, expensive-looking, sort of Whole Foods-looking chocolate bar has 500 milligrams of THC in it. There are 12 servings of marijuana in here, 12 servings. So the last time you shared a bar of chocolate this size with 11 other people was when? Right? This is what I would consume in about 3 minutes. And so that is a huge amount of THC. And this is what is coming our way very soon if this ballot measure passes. And has anybody been to Colorado besides the senator? Has anybody done a field trip? Have you gone to any of the stores? It's fine for you to say yes. You didn't do anything.
I was offered a tour of a dispensary because recreational use is legal.
Right. Did you go?
No,
I regret you not going.
I now I'm regretting it too.
Because it's interesting. Did you go to any
I went
stores?
to Oregon, yeah.
You were in Oregon. I haven't told. How was Oregon looking?
It was like a jewelry shop. You know,
It was beautiful?
You walked in, it was like set up like that. Everything was behind glass, and they wait on you like, buy this, buy that.
So that's the way the medical dispensaries in Massachusetts look. You feel like you're in some cross between like an Apple store and like a high-end bar boutique. Like there's somebody, things are behind glass. It felt very secure. I toured at least the medical dispensaries. The stores in Colorado are much more free-flowing. There's giant displays of lollipops and gummy bears and other things that's just easy to help yourself. Is that fair to say? Fair to say. Can you say, are you going to say anything more about your experience? Okay, so I'm zipping my lips up. Okay. So one of the things I will say about marijuana, this is a really good article that one of Sharon Levy from Children's Hospital wrote, is that in the year 1900, before tobacco had become an industry, less than 1% of Americans smoked cigarettes or had any interaction with tobacco at all. And tobacco is a North American plant that the native people used ritually. They did not smoke the equivalent of 2 packs a day. They probably used it once a week, right? Because it was a substance that gave people some pleasures, maybe it provided some anxiety relief. It was not especially addictive until the tobacco industry took it over, right? And by the year 1950, 50% of us smoked. Because what did the American tobacco system do? They began to plant tobacco products that were more and more and more potent to make them as addictive as possible. And then they added in 350 or 500 other entities to really get you addicted. And then they put them in these really smart forms, these concentrated, unfiltered cigarettes, right? They took a plant that wasn't so bad, and they made it really bad because part of the marketing strategy is to get as many young people addicted to these substances as possible. And again, if we could go back in time and say, yeah, tobacco really is a bad idea, let's not make it legal, we would have done it. Because tobacco is the #1 killer in this country still to this day. It's been the #1 killer for 70 years. And for us to launch down a path that we've already walked down before with marijuana, and I'm not going to say that people are going to be dropping dead of an overdose of marijuana, but I do want to actually correct my own little head that said no one has ever died of marijuana, because now children have died in Colorado of marijuana because they have helped themselves to that little jar of gummy bears sitting on a table, and they died because of it. So it would be really lovely if we didn't launch down a path that we've already been down before, which is causing a lot of injury, harm, and the development of addiction with another controlled substance. We already have plenty of controlled substances that are causing damage to our kids and to adults. So again, I want to hear from other people. I guess I just want to say a couple more things. This is what matters with all addiction. That is time and recovery. The whole model we use for recovery in this country is based on alcohol, which is after 5 to 7 days, you've gotten through the worst of alcohol withdrawal, and people at 7 or 8 days are pretty safe to go home and hopefully not drink, right? That's the model we use with all addiction, even though it makes no sense. Because for those of us who take care of people struggling with opiate addiction, I can tell you on day 7 and 8, you feel terrible. And the notion that you just got yanked off your opiates and I'm sending you back out to the curb to go to your 90 meetings in 90 days and you're going to do fine, that's crazy. People don't do fine, they relapse. And the relapse rate after detox is huge and the death rate is it's unacceptable. If you left my hospital after getting treated for pneumonia and that percent of people died, they'd shut my hospital down, right? So this notion that we call people in for their quote-unquote detox and we yank the opiate out of their brain and say good luck to you It's crazy behavior. No detox should run that way. It happens to be what gets funded in this state, and it happens to be the way that most detoxes run. They yank people off their drugs over a fast period of time. It's appalling. It's non-evidence-based medical care. Yet it's how they all run. So we opened up a detox in Greenfield, Mass. as of 8 weeks ago, and we don't do that. We put everybody straight on the medically assisted treatment unless they tell me they refuse it, and then I can't force them. But in general, we get them on the Suboxone, we get them on the methadone, we get them the Vivitrol shot, we hold on to them as long as possible. We spend the entire time saying to them, this is your first step on a very long journey. Because what matters in recovery is the length of time away from the drug. That's what matters. I need to build months and months and months, and then some years and years and years, and you know what happens? Your brain gets better. You rebuild the dopamine in your brain, and you can get better, but it takes time. And this fast detox does not work. I am going to spend just a couple minutes on alcohol because I can't leave a room without talking about it. So when you look at us as a nation, 1/3 of us drinks zero. We're talking about adults here. 1/3 of us drink a little bit, very light social drinking, a couple drinks a month, a drink a week. The final 1/3 of us drink all the rest of the alcohol. The final 10% of us drink on average between 9 and 10 drinks every day. Now that seems impossible. It is not possible. I'm going to remind us why that is. That is because the size of the beverage matters. So a beer is a beer is a beer. A 12-ounce beer counts as 1 drink. When I ask people in my office, what is your relationship to alcohol? People say, I have a couple drinks a night. Women in particular might say that to me. And I will say to them, oh, you're drinking wine? Yeah. What is it you're really pouring in your giant wine goblet every single night, right? They're not pouring 5 ounces of wine. Women go home, and I can speak as a woman who works and has kids and a dog and a house and laundry and everything's a wreck in my life, right? They come home after a long day and I walk in the house and I'm like, you're kidding me, right? There are literally breakfast dishes still on the table that nobody has put away, right? I have been up and working since 5. I've been gone all day, and this is what I return to. And that notion of, wow, I'm going to just check out a little bit because I'll be a quote-unquote happier, better mom while I'm lugging down my wine, right? This is the model that we show our kids. Stressed out parents coming home and drinking alcohol. And if we walked in the door as a stressed out parent at the end of a long day and said, man, I've had a really long day, will you go walk the dog with me? I hate my boss, I think I'm going to quit. Can somebody just go stand in the corner with me and let's go hold a tree position for a little while because that might actually make me feel better, right? What if the model we gave our kids was actually healthy behavior instead of just drinking alcohol and numbing? So the ratio of alcoholism among men to women used to be 9 to 1, men, women, and that was 20 years ago. It's now 6 to 3. So I'm running this detox, and half the people there are there for alcohol, and over half of the people there for alcohol are women between the ages of 24 and 50, and they are drinking vast quantities of alcohol. This is a massive switch, evolutionarily speaking, it's in terms of society. So as women, I'm speaking to you, but it's to all of us. You've got to be conscious about the alcohol use and why it is you're drinking. If you're drinking because you need to feel better, because you need to decrease your stress, because you want to sleep tonight, you're medicating with alcohol. And you need to develop a healthier relationship with something like exercise or meditation and not use a substance. It's targeted to women. It's right. This is being targeted to women. I'm running out of time. And let me just say a couple things because I don't get you guys very often. So when you ask the entire country, EMS, you say, what's your number 1 drug of abuse? Those dark green areas, the answer is heroin. My number 1 drug of abuse is heroin. So why doesn't the Southeast light up? Why is the Southeast not on fire? We know there's a pill problem there. Because there's a pill problem there. Those dark purple states are states where on average there's 1.5 bottle of opiate per year per person in that state. So we have doctors who are prescribing like mad in the Southeast. You know what? Pills are not our problem in New England. We may pat ourselves on the back, and I actually think Charlie Baker's done a really good job in terms of where he has been with the pills. But the notion that we are going to control today's problem by limiting pain prescriptions for people who have chronic pain, and that's going to change anything, that was a 4-year-old story, my friends. That horse is so far out of the barn. We don't have a pill problem anymore. I have a heroin problem. I have a fentanyl problem. I have a carfentanil problem. I got a 14-year-old whose first drug out of the barn is heroin. So, you know what? I didn't talk about today's problem. I'm not dealing with what happened 3 years ago. I need doctors who are overprescribing to stop overprescribing and get themselves under control. I need those of us who go see a dentist for our wisdom teeth to get out and say, hi, thanks. You can give me 4 of those, please, right? Don't give me 30 or 60 of those. Give me 4 and tell me how to use non-opiates to help my pain. That's what we need to do as consumers. But the notion, I guess I'm sort of directing this to the public people in this room, the notion that we have really going to make any headway on today's problem, it isn't happening. We have got to help figure out how to get heroin out of our streets and out of our communities, but then get treatment for people who need it now. I can't say that strongly enough. I live in this world every day right now. So for our kids, where might our kids get exposed to opiates? The athletes get exposed because they get injured, right? They break the femur, they have an ACL tear, they're handed a prescription by a prescriber, and as a parent, you've got to look at the prescriber and say, look, tell me how I limit my kid's exposure to opiates. What do I do? How do I use Tylenol and Motrin in combination to help with pain so I don't have to hand them an opiate because I don't want to do it, right? And if you're being handed a prescription because you had a knee surgery or shoulder surgery, you're getting a root canal, ask for as little as possible, or when you see the pharmacist, you don't have to get the full fill. That was part of the legislation that just got passed. You can hand them a prescription for 60 and say, give me 10. They're going to waste the other 50, that's fine. You may have to call if you need a little bit more, but that's fine too. Don't bring home more than you need, because the other place our teenagers get their opiates is out of your medicine cabinet. So if you have benzos like Valium or Xanax or Ativan, Ritalin, Adderall, or any opiate like Vicodin, Percocet, sitting at your house in a cabinet not being used, it does not belong in your house. It belongs to a police take back. Get it out of your house, or put it under lock and key if you're still using it. Signs at home, I mean, this is part of the Search the Bed program. There are other people covering this stuff, but I tell you, I want to be the parent who knows my kid is struggling with addiction on month 3, not on month 18, right? Because it's a little easier to get somebody treatment when they haven't been using for so long. So I go through my kids' bedrooms. They're dirty, I don't do their laundry, I don't clean the room, I spend most of my time yelling at them about taking care of the room, but I do a walkthrough about once every couple of weeks, just to make sure that things that don't belong in their room are out of there. That includes in my house, no food. I have mice. I live in the country. I don't want any food in their room. I don't want any sharp things in their room. I got kids. They're adolescents. Some of my girls are depressed, or my son's been depressed. I don't want any sharp knives in the room. There should never be razor blades in any of your kids' rooms, right? I mean, I know that seems crazy. They're not scraping the windows, right? You're finding razor blades, burnt foil, bent spoons, any of those things, bottles of bleach or vinegar, I know they're not cleaning. At least I can speak for my kids. They're definitely not cleaning. So my point is I go through, I don't want bottles of anything in any of my kids' room. No Tylenol, no Motrin, no Benadryl. They should not be self-medicating for anything without talking to an adult, because most kids have no idea the doses of anything they should be taking. And the number one cause of liver failure in the average teenage girl is, oh, I have period cramps, so I'm going to keep taking Tylenol. That stuff should be kept really under supervised vision. And I say to my own kids, you have a headache? I'd like to know you have a headache. Maybe I can help you. I can give you a little shoulder massage or something, but tell me when you're taking anything, because I want to make sure you're not overdoing it. And I don't say that because I'm a doctor. I say that because I'm a mom. So I'm not the only one. I know most people in the room do that. Okay, these are good books. You guys are going to get the slides because you're going to sign up on Dot's email and get the slides. But these are great books on addiction that I've read in the last 3 years that I thought were extraordinary. But I want to hand it over to other important speakers. I'm getting out of the way of the computer. And I'm going to be here for questions. People have them afterwards.
Potee, you will stay for
I'm going to stay.
questions on transition?
Yep.
Okay, why don't we go ahead
So do you want questions while you're transitioning computerized? Other questions? In the back there are hands. Yes.
Do you know statistics for underage alcohol abuse in countries with the drinking age rate?
You're going to correct me if I repeat your question, I got it wrong. Are you saying, is there a higher rate, or what is the rate of alcohol abuse in countries where the drinking age is 18? Is that the question? So we ask this question a lot, or people ask me this a lot, like why are, people start having their kids drink alcohol in Europe really early all the time. It's very normal, it's part of the culture. The alcoholism rates in Europe and Russia are extremely high. They are higher than this country because of early exposure. So, do you know countries where it's under 18, right? Lots of countries. I just came back from Cuba. Granted, Cuba's a little different. It's a very depressed country, emotionally depressed. The alcoholism rates in Cuba are running about 40%. That's a huge number, huge. Now, having said that, there's no other drugs in Cuba. There's actually no marijuana. There's no other drugs. It is a very restricted island, and you will be locked up in a bad jail for a really long time, but the alcohol abuse in Cuba was through the roof. And that is true for many other countries. Our alcoholism rates in this country are about 10 or 11%. There are many countries much higher. So it is not protective to be giving to your kid, here, try some wine, because that's what they do in Europe, and it's good for you. In fact, they've done studies. Nora Volkow, who's at NIDA, has done studies looking at drinking under your parents' roof underage, because you're the good parent who wants to have your kids safe at home on a Friday night. And what it does is it creates in your brain this really strong association with safety and living in the bosom of my family, and things are good, and alcohol. So it always makes you feel safe when you're drinking. And I'm not saying you should be terrified when you're drinking, but I remember what it was like to go to college at my first frat party. And the truth is, I want my teenagers to be very anxious when they go to their first frat party. I want them on high alert. Because lots of bad things happen, either to people, both directions, drinking too much when they show up at their first college party. My son, who is now a sophomore in college, his freshman year, 5 overnights in the ER, hauling roommates and classmates to the emergency room because of alcohol poisoning. He wasn't drinking. He, in fact, drinks very little because he considers part of his job to make sure other people around him aren't getting in big trouble. You know what would be helpful? Get your kids CPR trained. Have them feel medically responsible for those people around them. Teach them how to use Narcan. They should know basic life support and CPR. Send them off with some first aid tools so that when they go to college, they're sort of the go-to medical person. I mean, obviously, if there's real trouble, call 911 or go to the health center. But my son feels like he's responsible for some of the health of some of his classmates, and I think that's a good thing. He calls Uber, he hauls them off to the ER. If they're really sick, he's called 911. My point is that early exposure. I'm not going to support it. I think it's a bad idea. You can start drinking after 21, that's fine with me. But before that, I think it's a bad idea. I'm not going to say my 19-year-old never, ever drinks. I can't say that. I think he has. He's told me he has. He says to me, look, I drink very, very little, Mom. I'm conscious of what I'm doing. It is what it is. I know I don't live with him. I can't control him that way, but he understands the risk. So it is not beneficial to have a younger drinking age. Those kids don't have better outcomes. So we're still switching?
We are.
I don't know.
Another question for Dr. Potee? Is she going to say?
Yeah.
So there was a study, and I didn't read in depth, but there was something that came out recently that was talking about like the hungry brain, I think it was saying. Like it was in the headlines the past couple of days, and it was talking about how working your brain can make you hungry, even though you haven't had any exercise, you don't technically need the calories. So the reason I'm talking about that is because when you were showing the brain and the dopamine, one of the things they said is if you exercise first, you could actually reduce the hunger. And I was wondering if you think that's a dopamine. So is that all about dopamine? So it also sounds like for those of us who might have a genetic component that has to do with the dopamine, part of the conversation with your kids, in addition to the whole like restricting or minimizing your exposure before you get a little bit older, might also be about this dopamine.
Absolutely. Exercise improves dopamine. Being an athlete, and I'm not saying you have to be on a team sport. You could be a dancer or a gymnast. You can just go to yoga class a couple of times a week. It makes your brain better. Having friends and relationship builds dopamine. Connecting to people. Growing things in your organic tomato garden gives you dopamine. Loving a pet in your house. Those are positive things in your life. So giving as much of that stuff to our teenagers will make a difference in their lives because you want them to be choosing the right paths in their brain, right? That's what you want to be doing. All of that is lovely stuff for that teenage brain that is craving the physical, the sensation seeking. Those are great. Physical movement is huge. Most of our schools, a school like this is probably doing a good job. If we can get our kids moving, you know what? There should be meditation in every school in the United States. It should get piped in over the loudspeakers and 15 minutes every day where our kids learn. They have John Kevin's in that's getting piped in, and they learn to empty out their brain. For 15 minutes, it would be incredibly restorative and healthy for our kids to have that in our schools. So that's a great question. I want to say dopamine can't get better, right? These people I take care of, their brains aren't destroyed. They need time to recover. Locking people up in a jail cell for 2 years does not restore dopamine. Those people are your neighbors and your nephews and your kids, and they're going to come right back out. And you'd like them to have gotten a little bit better during their time away, and certainly not gotten worse. So levodopa is a little bit different because there's no chemical equivalent. Me giving you a Parkinson equivalent drug is not going to make your dopamine higher. We haven't figured out what that is other than the drugs that aren't so healthy that break the system. So there's natural ways to restore dopamine. I have no natural drug way of restoring dopamine that way.
drug, so we're very important, so October 22nd. Chief Carmichael, come on down, thank you.
Thank you for having me tonight. I'd like to have to be the guy that goes after Dr. Potee. So I brought some snacks that I'll pass around. The first thing that I'm going to pass around is an ounce of marijuana, plant material that we commonly see used. The reason why I brought this 1 ounce of marijuana is because this is what was decriminalized in Massachusetts in 2008. And looking forward here, with medical marijuana, we allow up to 10 ounces typically for a typical medical marijuana patient. And moving forward with legalization, we're talking about an ounce that you could have in your possession at any time. You can have up to 2 ounces that would be decriminalized, and you can have up to 10 ounces of the plant material in your home, which is 10 ounces is quite a lot. But I'm going to pass this around. I don't want to see any smoke in the back there anywhere, okay? This is 1 ounce of plant material marijuana, yes. Next thing, I'll pass these all around, but these are cheaper chews. These are basically just a little like caramel candy that basically has they're infused. They're products that have THC added to them, and throw those out there too.
Do the products have to say how much THC is in them?
Yeah, I'm gonna get into that. So I'm gonna pass this around as well. This is the chocolate bar. This is a brownie. This is a marijuana cigarette, which is in here. Hopefully it's still in there when it comes back. This is just one marijuana cigarette. And this cigarette, Dr. Potee was getting into THC levels. This one cigarette has 21.9% THC in it. Yes?
So just to clarify, the edibles that we're talking about, that look like chocolates, chewables, and things, are only available where recreational marijuana use is legal?
Well, so this is what happened in Massachusetts. As you saw, we saw some plant material marijuana, like the bag that we're passing around.
Right.
That's generally what we used to see. You know, the trend that we see now in Massachusetts, once medical marijuana came in, when medical marijuana came in, it also brought in your concentrates, your oils, that I'll show you guys some
Or
slides.
prescription? Under prescription?
Well, not prescription, but a doctor's recommendation
Right.
so they can get medical marijuana.
Right.
But the problem is in Massachusetts, we do have a dispensary model where medical marijuana patients can go to a dispensary, but they are not really all set up yet, so we also allow home cultivation. When we allow home cultivation, that's when the trend of processing these oils and creating edibles and that kind of thing occurred. So that's kind of the trend that we see. In Walpole right now, we've actually had situations where kids will take the marijuana plant material, put it in some parchment paper or wax paper. They'll take a hair straightener and heat up the marijuana plant and actually extract the oil out of the marijuana plant so that they can smoke the pure form of THC. And we'll talk about that a little bit, but it's like your shatter, your butter, your dabs, all that kind of thing. And kids are actually have the ability to extract these oils on their own and create things like this.
So my question about the edibles was that you cannot buy those in Massachusetts today?
Not without a medical marijuana.
Right.
No. But you can, under other markets, gray market, black market, there's still people that can process these things in their homes, and they can make it. All really these infused products are, like these gummy bears that I'm going to pass out, are basically a candy that are sprayed with THC, with the oils and stuff.
You actually have the power to actually do business medical and it's safe for the public to go and buy it. They need a prescription, or could they just walk in and buy it?
Well, medical marijuana, when we passed it here, we did it by ballot initiative in 2012. And the way that the language is written was that if you had a certain ailment that you qualified for, that you have a relationship with a doctor, that they could give a recommendation so that you could get a medical marijuana card, which would allow you to purchase marijuana or dispensary. But we also allow home cultivation where people can grow it on their own. So, but you know, the thing is that's done. Like we have that now in Massachusetts. Now we're thinking of complete recreational legal marijuana. But I'm going to pass out these gummy bears. I don't want to see anybody chewing back there either. But these, you will see, like if you look at this label that's on here, and this is part of what we saw when we were out in Colorado, was that you hear about the term regulate a lot. We're going to regulate and legalize marijuana, we'll tax it, regulate it. Well, regulate should not be confused with safety. And if you look at the labeling on these are 10 milligram servings, which means one of them is basically a serving. And what happens is people may have one, and they don't get the high from it because it takes longer if you need it. And then they take another and another, and eventually they're taking much more THC in their system than they should have. But the range of THC in these gummy bears is 18 to 30%. Right now, that's a huge. Dr. Potee talked about years ago when we had 1 to 2.5, 3% THC. Okay, these gummy bears have 18 to 30% THC. That's a significant range. But the fact is, nobody really knows how much is in it. It's somewhere in there, but we're not really sure. So that's how they regulate it. So I'm going to pass those out. This picture here was just I saw these two girls jump roping at the bus stop one day, so I challenged them to a jump rope contest. And I came in third. But this is why we're here. I throw this slide up here just because, you know, when we're talking about legalizing marijuana, you heard Dr. Potee talk about early onset of drug use and that kind of thing. And this, you know, what people want to do when they're 40 years old in their backyard, as far as law enforcement is concerned, we really don't care. But there is going to be an impact if we do this because we're increasing access and availability to our most susceptible people, and that's our youth. And when we increase access and availability and this thing just becomes widespread and our kids can get these things, they can get these high levels of THC concentrates in their hand, then now they've initiated to this drug, which ultimately can lead to further problems in the future. This work on here? You guys know oh. This guy here, if you haven't seen this video, this stuff here that's on this, but it's down there on that tray, that's what we call shadow. That's an extracted THC component that they put into this type of form, and basically they'll put that into a pipe, they'll put a screen on it, and they can smoke it out. Very high concentrates of THC. Some of it out in Colorado can be as high as 99%. Well, what happens is this guy goes opens that door, and he's actually heating it up with a hairdryer. And when they open the door, the oxygen mixes with the gases that are coming from the gas that they use to extract it with the hairdryer, and it basically blows up the whole room. And what we've seen in Massachusetts is already, we've had about 30 of them in New England and several in Massachusetts, including one in Tewksbury, was probably the closest to here, where they're extracting these oils using butane gas or propane gas, or sometimes use dry ice and things like that. But what's happening is they're extracting these oils and they're blowing the house up. Or a car will stop kids in Walpole that have a propane tank, and they're actually extracting oils in the vehicle by pushing the plant material into a tube and pushing the oil through it, pushing the gas through it, and extracting the oil from the other end. So another trend that we're seeing, but these explosions, we had one which is somewhat close to us in Medfield, where the entire garage blew up, a refrigerator and everything else, because because this young man was in there extracting oils using butane gas. Now, with the recreational use of marijuana potentially coming in, this would be allowed. It would allow home cultivation, processing, manufacturing, and that's when we would see an uptick in this kind of thing happen, when people would be trying to extract these oils. These were just cultivation sites that I took video of when I was out there. I apologize that I won't play it, but this was a 110,000 square foot marijuana grow facility, which is quite significant. But just to real quick, what they're talking about in Massachusetts, decreasing the burden on the criminal justice system, which will tax it and generate revenue. They're saying that incarceration is too punitive, that will rid the state of the black market. Now, none of this stuff is happening. Basically, what we look at, when I met with Senator Lewis out in Colorado, we met at the high-intensity drug trafficking area, Rocky Mountain Hideout office when we were out there. That's the hideout place that's actually keeping all of the data of what's happening out in Colorado, what the impact is. And, what we learned is that, yeah, they're taxing it, all right, but it's not nearly taking care of the problems that it causes. The other thing is, in Massachusetts, there's nobody in jail for smoking marijuana, right? There just isn't. Most people that are in jail in Massachusetts are in there because it was incidental to some other crime, there was other crimes committed, probation violations. There's a lot of other factors that take place. And in Massachusetts, marijuana possession has been decriminalized since 2008, but also since 1975, it's always an automatic dismissal in drug education classes in court. So that's very important. The black market has not gone away. The gray market has actually flourished out there. And even though you have this retail side, you still have this huge market of illegal growing and distribution. And what happens is it's made it very difficult for law enforcement to enforce the laws that they do have as far as amounts and everything else, because when they legalized it, it took away some of the access to the way to get a search warrant and how to enforce these things. And that's kind of what we see somewhat now with medical marijuana in Massachusetts, but with opening up the floodgates with legalized marijuana, we would not be able to enforce much of what we would be seeing. So I'll just get into the, so these are some of the things that we will see when we're talking about edibles. The first one, BHO, butane oil, that's using the gases to extract the oil from the marijuana plant and generate these very high concentrate THC. Shatter, dab, butter, wax, all of those are all THC concentrates. So they just come in different forms and they manufacture it in different consistencies. But again, all of these are concentrates. So you're getting that pure THC out of the marijuana plant, and then people are smoking it for putting it in food and that kind of thing. So we're now getting that very high concentrated THC. Very, very powerful, potent, toxic, and in Massachusetts, it's a Class C substance. It's under like hallucinogens and that sort of drug. Now these little gummy bears, they can't really see the picture too good, but that was part of the display that we've been demonstrating to the DEA. And we show those Swedish fish there just to ask people, when we show them to them, which ones have THC in them. And we do that because you can't tell the difference. And that's where it becomes a problem, because these items get into the hands of children, and they end up consuming these things, whether knowing or not, and that can cause some problems and very sick. The other display there are all different types of edible. And when I tell you, like, they come in every tip form you can imagine: beverages, baked goods, candies, you name it, they can put THC in it and create this drug. again, very different ranges of THC levels. Most of your edibles range anywhere from 18 to 30%, and any of your oils and shatter dabs are something way up to as high as 99%. Yes, sir. I'm sorry? They try and trick you? Oh, will they try and trick you? No, so the stores that would be here, you know, young man, you wouldn't be able to go into those stores. However, you know, we know that there's drug resale. Somebody can go in there and they can purchase it if they're over 21, and they can come up the street and they can distribute it on the street. And that's essentially what happens in Colorado. In fact, I witnessed it when I was out there. I saw people come out, I saw hand-to-hands go take place outside of the dispensaries that were there. That most people may not notice because it's a very quick transaction, but we saw it when we were out there. So no, you wouldn't be able to go into the store, buy it. They wouldn't try and trick you, but the other markets that are out there, it would increase access and availability. So these are just, again, this is represented in painting was with me. Now, this chart here, the THC one, so this is the THC that's out in Colorado. You can't even buy anything that's under 15% THC. Everything that's out there, including their edibles, even their edibles are over the 15% threshold. This here, that picture on the right, when I went out to a dispensary. It was 110,000 square foot. When I drove around the building, I couldn't figure out how to get in there. I went up, I knocked on the door. Some guy opened the window. You know, like when the Wizard of Oz, when he knocks on the thing, and then the guy comes to the door. It was kind of like that. This guy just came out of nowhere. Told him who I was. He let us come in. We were in there for about 5 hours. He showed us every square foot of the place. And that was one of the extraction labs where they're extracting all of the oil, huge vats of oil, and then they take it and they bring it into the kitchens and they make brownies and lollipops and everything else that you can imagine. So the clothes that I'm wearing, I had to throw them out. When I went from there to the airport, and the dogs were going to attack me, and the same guys stop me. I mean, you could smell me coming from a mile away. I got home and I just threw everything away. But this is another issue with diversion, and this is where law enforcement we're very worried about because, yeah, we're going to regulate, we're going to have these stores, we're going to allow home cultivation. You can have up to six plants, but you can also, if there's 2 people living there, you can have up to 12 plants. Who's going to enforce that? I have no idea. But out in Colorado, and this was done by the HIDTA people that we told you about, the demand up there was 130 metric tons. They actually figured out how much marijuana they would have to produce in order to pay for in order to deal with the demand that's out there. So 77 metric tons came from the retail side of it, so the dispensaries, like the cultivation side there. 77 metric tons came from that. Now, where did the other 53 metric tons come from? It came from home cultivation, which supplied the rest of that demand. But then you can imagine how much more of that, if 53 metric tons came from people's homes, how much more of that was actually out there. And where has it gone? It's gone to just about every state in the country. Marijuana that's coming from, that was grown and processed in Colorado is coming to Massachusetts every single day. It's the interdiction with the offices that are outside of Colorado and those adjoining states are picking up package after package of tons of marijuana that's coming out of it. So it's it's the diversion and to say, well, one of the best things about this law is if it passes, you can't get it if you're under 21. So, but with the diversion is so heavy that we know that it's going to be out there and be very. Yes.
So I'm confused. About a year ago, there was a great article in Time magazine that kind of went over all this information about the brain and how it affects
the bringing of younger children, and it actually went as far as to say that they regretted what happened in Colorado because there was nothing good that came out of it. So it's surprising that it's kind of progressing across to other states. If they have that, they were saying they wish they could kind of go backwards and not do it again. So why are things progressing?
The people in Colorado are wishing they didn't do it.
Yeah, because it didn't have the positive effects that they thought it would.
Yeah, Senator Lewis. So these are actually pictures that we took on my task force where you can see the butane gas, the number of plants, and this was from this person had a medical marijuana card, but where you're supposed to have 10 ounces, but the entire house was a grow. Everywhere you looked, there was butane gas plants, there was plants growing and processing and that kind of thing. So, but I don't want to, go any further than that. If you have, this is one question from one picture from the Medfield explosion that I went over to when the kid was extracting oils. They were using some of the propane gas. The mom went out into the garage and she shut the garage, and as soon as she slammed the door, the oxygen get into the whole garage blew these 400-pound doors right off the hinges. So, it's a huge public safety issue that we're really worried about. So that's all I got.
So I'm State Senator Jason Lewis. I live here in Winchester, and I have the privilege of representing Winchester and a number of other communities in the state Senate. Part of my responsibility is to chair the Public Health Committee for the legislature. So I do a lot of work on issues of health, of substance abuse, addiction, mental health, and notwithstanding that, I have to say probably 2 years ago I was completely clueless on what marijuana is today. And let me ask this, just by being here tonight, and thank you so much for being here. I think this is a wonderful turnout. Let me just, by a show of, so by being here, you're already people who are most likely a little more clued in, a little more interested in these issues. By showing up, by a show of hands, how many were surprised by something, at least one thing you've learned tonight about marijuana? So, I think almost every single hand went up. And that's exactly the experience that I had as well. And that's the challenge that we're up against, is because people out there, our friends, our neighbors, are clueless. Our kids are not clueless. They know a little bit more. But adults are clueless. Their image they have in their mind is, smoking a joint, and, that was back in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. You got high, what was the big deal? And the view of so many residents of Massachusetts and around the country, is, well, pot's there, people are going to use it, what's the big deal? Why wouldn't we just regulate it, legalize it, regulate it, and tax it? And what I learned, I was appointed to chair a special Senate committee on marijuana about 18 months ago. And that was because the state Senate recognized that we had already decriminalized marijuana in Massachusetts in 2008, and that was through a ballot initiative. It was not through the legislature. We then, through the ballot initiative, legalized medical use of a medical marijuana program. And we saw that there was a pretty good chance that there could be a push to come on the ballot again to legalize marijuana for recreational use. And it's not by accident that it's on the ballot this year. It's a presidential election year. A lot more people are going to come out to vote. A lot more people who will be likely to be lower information voters. And the proponents know that that's their best opportunity to be successful. So we've covered everything in terms of what marijuana is today and how vastly different it is, the potency, the kinds of products that people are consuming, all of these issues. The main thing to keep in mind is that what's being discussed and will be voted on November 8th, it will be one of 4 ballot questions. It'll be question number 4 that we all will vote on, is really not about whether a consenting adult, 21 and older, can possess marijuana and smoke a joint or eat a marijuana brownie. What it's really about is whether we are going to allow the commercial billion-dollar marijuana industry into Massachusetts. That's what this is about. That's to the question that was asked. That's who's behind this. There is already a $5 billion marijuana industry just between Colorado, Washington State, and California. California has a huge medical marijuana business, and several other states. So it's already a multi-billion-dollar industry. There are many, many companies already in this industry. Is growing with leaps and bounds. There are lawyers in this industry, accountants, consultants, you name it. There's a lot of money in this industry. And there are organized interests. There's something called the Marijuana Policy Project based out of Washington, D.C. Years ago, the movement was really pushed more by sort of activists. They had more, I would say, more of a social justice bent to them, in terms of the war on drugs and trying to defeat that. That's really not who's pushing this movement anymore. It's an industry, a lot of money, and the Marijuana Policy Project is pushing essentially the same ballot question in 6 states this coming November. So it won't just be Massachusetts that voters that will be voting, it'll also be in California, Arizona, Maine, and a few other states. And they're working very deliberately to roll this industry, out. They've got a strong foothold on the West Coast, and they're really looking to break into the East Coast. And they picked Massachusetts because we're viewed as a very blue state, very liberal state, probably more likely to be open-minded, and that's why they're targeting this state. So they've got several $1 million coming in from out of state, and we will be seeing TV ads, over the next 8 weeks. And the only way that we are going to be able to prevent this industry from coming into Massachusetts, and once they're in, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. So we will do everything we can. Our law enforcement would do everything we can. Our public health folks would do everything we can to try to, regulate this, to try to control it as best we can, but it's impossible to do that. There will be all of these products that you've seen tonight. It's very difficult to have clear labeling. It's very difficult to know what the potency is. There's no equivalent to a breathalyzer test, so if people are driving while high, very difficult to detect that, very difficult to test for it, and certainly it's difficult to get a conviction in court. There will be, it will be very difficult for cities and towns to actually keep the industry out of the community. In other words, if Winchester, for example, didn't want to have any pot shops, it couldn't just be done by the Board of Selectmen. It couldn't just be done by town meeting. For those of you familiar with the way town government works, it would actually require a local referendum. The town would have to call the vote, have to educate the voters, just to keep out of the town, and this would be true of any city or town, marijuana pot shops or cultivation facilities or manufacturing facilities. So very different from, for example, the casino law that we have in the state, whether you agree with that or disagree with that. That's an opt-in model where cities have to vote to opt in to if they want to host a casino. This is just the opposite. It would assume that you would have to be participating in the industry. Would be very difficult for communities to try to opt out. And even if a vote was taken in a referendum at the local level to opt out, you still would not be able to stop people from growing it at home. So as the chief mentioned, you'd be able to grow up to 12 plants at home. One plant, they're large, they grow to about 5 feet tall. That will generate about a pound of marijuana, just one plant. So you saw what 1 ounce is tonight. So it's thousands and thousands of dollars on the street. 1 ounce of marijuana is about $300 street value. So what you're doing is you're basically, and this is exactly what's happening in Colorado, rather than squashing the black market, you're actually opening up a whole new avenue which is basically for people to even grow in their own homes. Very difficult to know, of course, how much somebody's growing. It's almost impossible for our law enforcement, and it's feeding a whole new black market. Also, because marijuana would continue to be illegal under federal law, what happens is gangs and cartels and other criminal elements are actually moving into Colorado to set up shop there, and then they can smuggle the product to other states. As Chief Carmichael mentioned, we are even seeing it here on the East Coast. Just that's in Colorado, which, as you know, these are vast states out west. The geography is much different. Here in New England, everything is so compact. You can imagine the incentive there will be for these criminal elements, and even just people in their own homes, to be able to grow this, and then that product would be smuggled, to New York, to Connecticut, to New Hampshire, to other states. So once the industry gets a foothold, no matter how hard we would try to regulate it, and the proponents of the ballot question talk about a cannabis control commission that would be established, that would have the power to issue regulations and all of that, but the reality is there is no way to control and protect public health and public safety against all of these issues. So we can go on from there. There's a lot of other aspects to it, but the important thing, and we should open up for questions, is for people to get educated. Because I think what I found, and I know Dr. Potee and Chief Carmichael have found this, when people do take the time to learn a little bit and they figure out that this proposed ballot initiative is not just about whether an adult should be able to smoke a joint, but it's about opening up to a whole commercial marijuana industry and the state of the industry today. That often changes their mind about how they feel about this. But that means we've got to educate our friends and our neighbors. We need to talk about it. And by being here tonight, you're taking that very important first step. So thank you. I also just want to really thank Dr. Potee and Chief Carmichael. This is on their own personal time, coming out to do this here, and I know they're doing this in other communities, and they're doing it because they are so passionate about getting the word out. And that's why I'm spending so much time on this as well, because this is about our kids. I have 2 teenage daughters. Many of you do as well, grandchildren. That's who we're concerned about. And once this happens, there's no turning back. So that's why it's so important. And thank you to the Coalition for a Safer Community, Dot Butler and Officer Pernick and Representative Day is very active, and everyone for doing such important work in our community on a range of prevention and addiction issues. This one, of course, being very. Go ahead, and we'll work our way around.
Is there usually a law about warnings, cigarette packs or warnings, health risks, if there are dispensaries, what is the plan for such warnings?
It is silent on health warnings. So there's nothing, it's 24 pages long, and does not mention anywhere that there shall be health warnings on the packaging, just like we do for tobacco. So that would be a significant concern. I should have mentioned that the Special Senate Committee that I chaired and went out to Colorado and did a lot of research, talked to more than 75 experts in the industry. We did publish a report, and just Google it, or just write or email me or call. Take a look at that, because a lot of these issues, around how that is dealt with in Colorado and how it would be dealt with under this ballot question, we do cover in there, and we compare and contrast, how that works. So that would be a good example. Yes.
Would you mention how this got to be on the ballot, how it got through the legislature?
Yeah. So, a great question, and I'll just repeat it. Sorry. So, the question is, how does this even get to be on the ballot? So, Massachusetts is a state, not all states are like this, that does allow voter petitions. So, essentially, I guess it was designed by the framers of our state constitution, which, by the way, predates the federal constitution. It's the oldest living constitution in the world. Oldest written constitution still in use in the world today in Massachusetts. But when it was written, I think they saw it as an escape hatch, so if the legislature wasn't doing its job, can't believe that would never happen, that this was a way for the citizens to bring a proposal forward. And there is a whole process they have to go through. The Attorney General has to first certify that the language is, it's written correctly, and then they have to gather a certain number of signatures. And they've done that. So they jumped through. They did achieve all this. And again, it's not surprising. They've had a lot of money behind them. They could hire people to go out and collect signatures. It's not that difficult to do. So they've gone through that whole process. So once you clear those hurdles, and by the way, there will be 4 questions on the ballot this November. This will be one of 4. If this were to pass, it just needs a majority of voters. It is then the law of the Commonwealth. It is equivalent to the legislature passing a law and the governor signing it. It's equivalent to that. It has the same force of law. Some people then say to me, well, okay, I'm not so happy with some aspects of this ballot question, but I'm not happy with the status quo either. Well, what about if this passes? Can't the legislature go in and fix it? Okay, we know we need health warnings on there. We know we want to restrict certain edibles. We know we want to limit the potency. We know the tax rate is so low it's not going to generate enough money to even cover the regulatory and enforcement costs. We don't like home growing of 12 plants. Can't you fix it? The answer is, theoretically, you could pass a new law to change it, but imagine how difficult that would be, because if the voters have spoken, it is very, very difficult for legislators to then say, okay, we're going to not listen to the will of the voters, and we're just going to do it differently. So while it's not impossible, it would be a Herculean task to try to go back in and basically fix a mess. And it would be a mess. And in Colorado, even though this passed in the ballot in 2012, when I was there and the chief was there, that legislative session, so this was basically, it was the beginning of this year, I think they debated and passed 12 marijuana-related bills. So they would just, it's all-consuming. And that's the other thing. It becomes, it hijacks the agenda, because now all of a sudden this jumps right to the front, and there's going to be tremendous pressure on the legislation, on Governor Baker, to try to fix these issues. But it's very hard to do, and it would come at the expense of dealing with public education, MBTA issues, you name it, all the other things that we need to be focused on.
So, given all that, just sort of educating, just really small groups of people, what is the state going to do when you talk about these sort of residential options? Is there any kind of opposing information that the state is going to put on TV so that you can direct us to a summary of what to report or something to try to get this word out?
So the state can't do that, and because it's in fact, because it's a ballot question, public employees, like state government employees or even town employees, cannot take a position or cannot publicly advocate a position one way or the other. You can't use state resources to do that. I'm an elected official, so I am allowed to do that. But even tonight, we need to be sensitive to, we're in a public building, for example, so there are limitations on what you can and can't do. There is a campaign that has been launched. It was it's very bipartisan. It was Governor Baker, together with Mayor Marty Walsh of Boston, the Speaker of the House, DeLeo, and our Attorney General, although legally she can't be on the committee, she's also very supportive. Has been created and is actively working to try to educate voters. What I would say is I don't think we should go further into the campaign. I am on the steering committee, and anyone who wants to talk about that aspect of this in terms of the campaign and what you could do to get involved or learn more about that, feel free to please follow up with me afterwards.
How do you regulate, and who regulates what comes in? No, from a package. That's a real concern me. Most people are frightened about believing who's going to grow it. What really frightens me is right down here, in a package, in some store, a distributor, and it was very innocent for the children with a candy or a chiclet. That's very, very concerning to me, and I'm sure other parents. So where is the regulation for that?
So that's a big concern to me and to Chief and others. Basically, what this proposed law, question 4, it would establish what they call a Cannabis Control Commission. It would consist of 3 people appointed by the state's treasurer. Why the treasurer? Good reason. And they would have have some power to issue regulations. They would be advised by what's called a cannabis advisory board that this law would establish. Most of the members of that cannabis advisory board would have to have some industry experience or industry knowledge. So I think it's safe to say the fox would be guarding the hen house. And they would be advising these 3, cannabis control members. And, maybe they would do the right thing. Maybe they would issue smart and strong regulations that would, really seek to protect public health and public safety. But we don't know, and we have no guarantees what they would or wouldn't do. And as I said earlier, if this were successful, you now have a major industry that would have, would be legally, established in Massachusetts. And just like, Dr. Potee talked about the tobacco industry and what they did over many decades to make their products more addictive, more enticing. They used very sophisticated marketing strategies, celebrity sponsorships, advertising, and as much as you try to, clamp down on that and restrict it, it's very difficult. Free speech, commercial free speech laws apply, so it's difficult to restrict, advertising and things like that. And although we would certainly try to do that, it makes it very difficult. So I think a lot of the answers to those kinds of questions are unknown because it was not spelled out in this proposed law, and it would have to be figured out in the future.
So I know that the report compares the Colorado law with the Massachusetts initiative.
Yes.
Does the Massachusetts initiative go further than Colorado? Would it expand and give more ability to work?
Generally, it's the opposite. In other words, you might think that, okay, they've looked at Colorado and they've seen all the problems because, edibles have been a major challenge to deal with. Home growing is creating a black market. All of the drug driving is an issue. You think maybe they saw all of that, and the people who wrote this, and they said, okay, let's really write this in a way for Massachusetts that would really try to protect public health and public safety. Okay, you still legalize it, you would still have places that sell it, but you'd have really prioritize health and safety. But that's not the case. In fact, it's almost the opposite. I think because they've learned lessons from Colorado. So one example of that is that about a third of Colorado cities and counties basically, it was very easy for them in Colorado, the way it was written there, to opt out. So they don't have any marijuana cultivation facilities, they don't have any manufacturing or retail. So because it was so easy to do that, the way it's written for Massachusetts, as I described earlier, it would actually make it very difficult for any community, whether it's Winchester or anywhere else, any other city or town, that says we don't want this in our community. It would make it very difficult for them to opt out. So that's just one
So even
example.
if you favor legalization in some abstract way, this is a bad way to do it.
That's a great point. If everybody heard that, I suspect people in this room and being here tonight probably feel pretty strongly that legalization under any circumstances, marijuana for recreational use is not the right thing. But there are many people out there who aren't convinced of that and maybe think that legalization could be the way to go. And what I would say, absolutely to those people, if you have friends, neighbors who feel that way, is even if you are convinced that legalizing marijuana for recreational use, is the way to go, it's inevitable, people are going to use pot regardless, this particular ballot question, this particular proposed law, again, if this passes, this will be the law of Massachusetts, is the wrong approach, and because it's deeply flawed in all the ways we talked about. And I would argue also it's the wrong time, because, why wouldn't we wait to learn from Colorado, learn from Washington, let them figure this all out, let them figure out what their health warnings are, let them figure out how to measure the potency accurately, let them figure out how to deal with edibles. Let them develop an equivalent to the breathalyzer test so we can understand what you're going. Slow down. Let them figure it out. Maybe this is inevitable. Maybe this will happen eventually, but we'll be a lot better off if we wait. And of course, we're already battling the opioid and heroin epidemic, which is a huge challenge. Do we want to add another challenge? So that's the way I would talk to people who say, well, it's the big deal, and legalization probably happening anyway. This particular ballot question, this particular law is really problematic, the wrong way to go for Massachusetts, and it really is a lot. It's a lot smarter for us to wait and learn.
Two questions. One is, does it lead to other drug use? And the second one is, if somebody's pressing it and they're making their own oil, THC out of it, are people putting other stuff into that, other drugs, mixing it with other things, making it a whole different Yes.
Okay. All right. She'd be the perfect person to answer your first question. So I think you're kind of asking the gateway drug question, right?
I can answer it.
The question is basically, if I talk about it, is marijuana a gateway drug? Does use of marijuana then lead to the use of other drugs, heroin, cocaine?
So Dr. Potee actually talked about a little bit age of onset, and you heard from her say that some of the people that she deals with at the jail their onset is 8, 9 years old, and it's ultimately led them to these other issues. We know that age of onset is probably one of the most significant factors that we can look at for kids that are establishing a pattern, habit, behavior that sends them on a trajectory of addiction. Now, in Walpole, we track our youth risk survey very closely. We track our overdoses that we have very, very closely. In Walpole, we've had 112 overdoses in the past 5 years. 18, 19 of them have been fatal because we have Narcan. We've probably used Narcan about 60, 70 times. So those numbers would be much higher. But we do a lot of analysis on our overdoses, and what we see over and over and over again are people that had early onset drug use that set them on a trajectory of addiction that ultimately has now led to either a fatal overdose or use of other drugs. Now, you may hear the proponents say that, if you allow marijuana to come in, that we're going to have less overdoses and the opiate problem is going to go away. There's nothing that could ever show that or prove that. And I'll tell you a personal story. The other day, I was driving on Washington Street in East Walpole. We had a call of an overdose. I went to the overdose because I just happened to be almost in front of the house when we came in. I pulled into, there was like an apartment building. I went inside, and there was a 30-year-old person who was deceased, and right in front of him was the huge marijuana bomb. Right next to that was the heroin that he had just shot up, and it was a fatal. It was already past the point of using naloxone, and we see that over and over again. So does marijuana lead to other drugs? Not every time. It's not something that like you smoke marijuana, you're gonna be a drug addict. But those other things that Dr. Potee talked about, the environmental factors, those growth factors, when genes and that kind of thing, they all play a factor as well. But early onset is one of the most significant factors, and that's what we're worried about, because you see we're allowing home cultivation, all these stores to come in, and it's going to increase access and availability much higher than what we see right now.
I was just going to say, like, for instance, when you see the gummy bear stuff, if that comes in and that's for sale and somebody buys it and then sells it, there's your early onset, right? Is that you've got little gummies coming out, and who isn't going to have a gummy? So a little kid, teenagers will be very entrepreneurial, and so that's what will happen there. So I wanted to ask, so it just basically seems like, I'm going to say big marijuana just because I think that sticks in my head. It seems like they crafted this bill, you know what I mean? Especially if this bill is not giving us a tax rate to address any of the concerns. And not just a concern, like I would want the tax, let's say I was going to be really open-minded and let's pot for everyone. So I would want that tax rate not just to cover like the criminal and medical costs. I would want it to like, oh, like let's give some money to education. Like I want it to be bringing me lottery money back into my communities. And it sounds like it's not doing that. And it's not. And then the non-opt-in thing, I think, is something that nobody is getting. And that's a big deal in Massachusetts. Like, you know, I can see people thinking it's harmless. They're still thinking it's their pot. And like, this is not your mom's pot. It's like what should be said about this, the new pot. And so this ability, people, I can tell you people in this town who are, I would say, more high information than low information are not understanding that at all. I bet they are not understanding that, and that is big. And word of mouth is good. I just wish there was a bigger way to get that out because people don't, you know, they're fine going to some other town and seeing the little vape store, but they don't want a vape store downtown near the CVS, and they do not want, people do not want that. That's like the whole, like, not in my backyard situation. So that would be great to get out.
Until it's in their backyard.
Yeah, people do not want it.
Yep. Well, I agree with everything you said, and as I said at the outset, I think people, just like I was clueless too, and we've got to help. You know, you're now more educated on this than probably 99% of adults out there from what you've learned tonight. And please do everything you can. Put it on social media. Talk it up. You know, spread the word. And you don't have to do it in a way that's like, you know, what they like the proponents say, oh, they just reefer madness, they're fear-mongering. It's not fear-mongering, it's not reefer madness. This is just what it is today. This is the nature of it. This is an industry, you know, and they are like any industry. They want to sell more product, make more money. But the problem is in this industry, it's an addiction industry. And, you know, that runs counter to public health and public safety, particularly for teenagers.
Jason, we're
You have to wrap up?
going to have another community forum, and that will be in October, and Jason will be speaking at that as well. And also, our youth risk behaviors survey, the key findings are going to be presented that night as well. So we're trying to tie it all in together. Like, you know, you were just saying that there is definitely correlation going on.
Yeah. So that will get the word out about the October. So that'll be another opportunity to help spread the word and get more people to attend.
Still in the auditorium.
Do we have to wrap up? Or can we take
No, keep going.
Okay. I'm happy to stay as long as anyone has
Go ahead,
questions.
Mike.
I guess a quick question. I mean, it's been so informative. I loved everything I learned. You know, the first thing is like, I want to go home and I want to email everybody, like, no question 4. So is there like a bullet form, like a summary of things, you know what I mean, like factual things that we can do, like, let's do that, this is what we learned, you know, and then you guys will look up with one, because, you know, it's true, like, not everyone is going to have time to, you know, go to these, you know, really awesome, you know, seminars that we just, like, learn from Dr. Potee, you know, so is there like...
There is, if you go to the, it's the campaign for a safe and healthy Massachusetts.
It's behind you.
Is it up there? Oh, it's right there. Yep. So go to that website and you'll see there's the information that you're looking for there. Yes.
Can I just announce that a little bit louder? YouTube, Dr. Potee's on YouTube. She does her presentation, so please just YouTube her. And also, she said to contact Dot, and Dot will forward her presentation to you with no problem whatsoever. But she's a great resource. So, same with Senator Lewis, Chief Carmichael, and our own local police department coalition.
And also, I know the NAPA website, right? Dot.
Yeah.
Is that, what is it, NAPA.org? Yeah. Okay, that's another great resource. MassPreventionAlliance.org is a great resource too. Yeah. Sorry to keep you waiting. Thanks for hanging in there.
What if a child accidentally aged because we thought it was so good?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're worried about because, you know, maybe when it's in the package, maybe you can see that it's not a regular gummy bear. You know, maybe you don't, you know, it depends how well labeled it is. But once it's out of the package, then it just looks like any other gummy bear or Swedish fish or lollipop. And there have been kids in Colorado who have accidentally eaten it and had to go to the hospital. Fortunately, I don't know if anyone's died, but there have been some very severe reactions, and certainly the number of children, who had to go to the emergency room because they accidentally ate a marijuana, cookie or brownie or candy has gone up quite a lot. So we're worried about that. And the other thing is pets, by the way, pets. Pets eating this stuff is a big issue as well. Obviously, they don't know the difference. So, actually, we were thinking about the strategy for how to convince the voters to vote against this. We thought maybe that's actually the way to do it. Protect their pets, right?
Yeah. Also, the labeling. We just walked out with a family to look at the candy bar, and you can't read until very, very fine, small print THC in faded gray in the black in the chocolate. It was amazing to see. Yeah, that it's very, very small. You don't know what's in there. And like the young guy said, what happens if you ingest it? Right, regular candy.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Thank you for great questions. And tell your friends.
Some more wrappers and containers up here. If anyone would like to look at these, they were just sent out to us last week in Colorado. You sure can. And please ask any questions in public. Thank you so much for coming out today.